Okay, so we are going to be working on the Chapter 6 exercises here, and as per usual, my first step is, of course, to back up my work. So I'm going to make a copy of last week's work and then paste it back into the same folder, and hopefully this won't take too long to paste back in. There we go. And then I'm going to rename that to Chapter 5 Complete, has been my pattern here. So we have a safe starting point. I am going to go ahead and open up the project. Today I'm just going to go into the folder and double click the solution file. And if I did all my file saving and management correctly, this should be the right version. The way that I know it's the right version is, if you remember, we altered our default page to actually include a bunch of HTML5 semantic tags and put all the buttons and stuff into a table, right? So that's how I know I'm on the right version. All right, so given the fact that that is complete now as a step, let's go ahead and get to the practice exercises for this chapter. So I am on page 297, and they want us, of course, to open up our project and do all our file management stuff, so make sure that you do that. All right, and they also want us to go ahead and run this in the browser just to make sure that it works, so that we didn't screw something up and that we got the right version. So, boy, isn't this just wonderful? Let's do a refresh on that. Let's do a hard refresh. All right, and it's still not working. I'm sorry, what did you say? No, you shouldn't have to. The question was, do we always have to set default as the start page? No, you should not have to, but I'm going to just go ahead and do that just as a safety catch here and try to run it again. All right, so let's try to figure out why it's not working. It says the directory or file specified does not exist on the web server. The URL contains typographical error. So the one little piece of background I should give you guys here is, as I was trying to open this up, I had to realize that my Google Drive got split into two folders, so I would move stuff from one spot to another. So I'm anticipating that might be my problem. But I am going to try to rebuild this. So what I'm going to do is actually come up here to the menu, and because this is moved, I'm going to click on Build Website. And what that does is it actually does some things in the background that help to clean up problems. So let's see what it's throwing here as an error. It says invalid file name for file monitoring in the bin folder. So that's this folder up here. That's not one that we created. Where does that one come from? From the magic world of Microsoft, it just automatically gets created when you run the project. It's all the background files. All right, so it's basically it's not letting me into a specific DLL file. So now my inclination here is I could go looking for that particular file, which probably isn't a good idea, but I'm actually going to do something kind of weird. I'm actually going to delete that folder. Is that a good idea? What's the worst thing that could happen? I have a backup, right? The worst thing that could happen is I move this back to where it was before and it'll work. But I wanted everything in my folder so I know where to find it. So here we go. I'm now going to right click and do a build again. And notice it said build succeeded. So I'm okay, where's my bin folder? All right, why don't we go ahead and run this and see what happens now? Okay, so I'm going back to the drawing board, folks. So this is actually kind of fun to watch me fumble, because you guys do this at home all the time, right? And you think that every time I work, all my stuff is perfect, right? Yeah, this is not my idea of fun either. All right, so here's what I'm going to do for right now, because I don't want to waste time here in class, I'm actually going to work from the original location where it was stored. Not what I wanted to do. And just to kind of give you a little synopsis here, what happened is I installed a new version of the Google Drive file stream software, which creates a virtual hard drive on my hard drive. Left my old Google Drive files in place and replicated them. So now I have like double the information. But apparently it doesn't like to be moved, and some of the file associations changed because that's a different drive letter. So actually what I could have done, now I'm thinking of the solution after I'm like already bailed on it, is I could have done a find and replace for files and found anything that had the G drive letter on there and probably fixed it. But all right, I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to go back to the spot where it was, and I'm just going to open up this one. Why? Because I know it works. And we're going to verify that in a second. And if it doesn't work, boy, that'll really be embarrassing. I'll just start a new video. You guys will never even know, right? All right, let's go ahead and hit play. And this time it's going to work, right? We hope. Whew. All right. Is that what it's supposed to look like? Okay, good. All right, let's go home. I'm kidding. All right. Let's actually do some work. All right, I'm going to pull my book off to the other screen here and only pull it over when I need it. All right, so we're past that first step. And then our next step here in, let's see, we're on step number 3 now. We are going to add the Jquery libraries to the project. So I'm going to go ahead and close the browser window. We're going to go to the root of our project. We're going to do a right click, and then we're going to do manage NuGet packages. And we'll bring up the package manager. And what we want to install, and we don't want to look at the installed ones, we want to look at things that we can install, is we're just going to type Jquery right here in the search bar and let it automatically find the version. Now we were just on the website earlier tonight, so we do know that the current version is 3.31 or thereabouts. And I'm looking right here, Jquery came right up. It's got version 3.31. And oh my God, I do want you to also scroll down and look at the fact that there's more Jquery things here. So a lot of the Jquery user interface libraries are present. There's validation libraries, and there's a bunch of other little tools that kind of interact with it. We do want this first one. And then I do want you to also notice that if you really want to be matching up with the book, you can. You can actually go into these version choices here and find the same version that's in the book and match it up. One thing that I do see people making that mistake of quite often is they'll start copying code from the book and forgetting that the Jquery libraries are different versions. It doesn't matter which version you're really using, folks. Just make sure that whatever's in your code matches up with what's in your library. So don't call the 1.8.2 library if you loaded 3.3.1, right? So wherever that's an issue. My advice is install the latest version. If for some reason we find that there's a problem, guess what I would do? I might go back to the old version because I know it works, right? That's always a possibility. All right, let's go ahead and click install. Why is it a good idea to use the newer stuff? How about it might be more secure? Might have more features? Those are important considerations. All right, so it's trying to go through the process of doing this, and it says it's installed, right? Is it? Well, let's click on the scripts folder and see. Well, holy cow, yes it is, right? You guys noticing all the different Jquery components that were dropped in, including the minified version, and then there's one that's got a map extension. I don't know what that's about, right? We'll figure that out. What's Slim? Even more stripped down than min. So if you're using really basic commands, sometimes that's not a bad choice. So if you guys do go to deploy a project and you know that all the commands that you need are in the smallest possible version of the library, that's the one you use because it runs faster. Simple as that. If you need higher end features where you need all the latest, greatest stuff, then you load the whole thing up. But the min libraries are usually the ones you'll see deployed because it just makes a whole lot of sense. All right. All right, so at this point, we're going to bring up the calculator test file. Yes, we're doing QUnit testing again, folks. And they want us to set that as the start page. So let's go ahead and set that as start page this time. We already have our Jquery libraries installed. And then inside that scripts folder, here's where we're going to add that special file that we were talking about in the lecture. All right, we are going to add a JavaScript file to this folder. And they want us to call it underscore references. And this is the one that has special meaning to Visual Studio here. So underscore references.js. So it creates the file, and then inside this file, we want to add references to each one of the key libraries that we're going to be using. And I'm just copy pasting this right from the PDF. But notice as I do that, it immediately tells me that this is wrong with the underline. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that this matches up with the library that I actually have. And if I do that, the underline should go away. Right? How do I know what the correct thing is to type? Well, I look over here. Could I have just used the Minified Libraries right away? Sure. Are you curious to see what the real library looks like? Well, click on it. Start reading. Now that does have a lot of code. That's about 10,000 lines of code. If you look at the human readable version of it. What's kind of neat about that is if you're curious, you can like search through it and see exactly how they do all the stuff they're doing. They're not hiding it from you. It's all there for the taking. All right, on to step number 5. Here we're going to open up the calculator library.js file. And it says add a reference to the references.js file. So wait, we're referencing from one JavaScript file to the other? Yes, that's exactly what we're doing. So the good place to place this for me is right at the top of the document. So go right up to the top, create some space, and then drop in the line from the book or type it in. That's up to you. And do this. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting is that they have you do one other step that's kind of odd. And we haven't talked about this. But it says in step number 6, so bottom of 297, top of 298, it says we want to trigger an immediately invoked function. That's kind of bizarre. Because I don't know if you guys have done that in your JavaScript classes yet. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. And that function is what I'm going to pull in. And it's got some kind of weird looking syntax. And notice that there's actually an acronym for this. It says immediately invoked function expression. We call it iffy. Because it sounds kind of iffy, right? So we're going to place that right below this. And notice the difference here. So immediately invoked. Notice that we have a function call, but it's inside a set of parentheses. Isn't that kind of strange? And then we're going to take all the code that we have and place it right into this spot. You guys catching that? So all the other code, that means everything else that's here, cut that and place it right into this spot. And then what I would do as a suggestion is do a Control-A to select everything, and then come up here to the Edit menu and format the document just to correct all the little indents and everything so everything sits right. So hopefully it looks something like this. Now, step number 7, and there's some complicated steps here, and I'm going to tell you what, you screw up one of the steps, guess what happens? Yeah, I see the nods, all right. So all of a sudden everything starts falling apart, right? So that's one of the reasons why this book has, so this is what your code should look like now, right? That's why they do it. So step number 7 is where I'm at, top of page 298. It says remove the variables that reference text input and text result because we're going to use jQuery instead to access those things. So those things will be deleted. All right. Then it says additionally surround the number click, plus click, minus click, clear entry, and clear functions with an IFE that is assigned to the calculator property in a calculator namespace. Okay, that's deep, right? All right, so we need it to look like what's in the book. So what I'm going to do is very carefully find the functions they're talking about, which I did find. They're down here. I'm going to zoom out a little bit to kind of get them on screen so you can see the entirety of it as I'm doing it. And then in front of, okay, so all of this is what we're grabbing. So we're going to add a line here or two. And here's where I'm going to do a little copy paste to save a little typing. So this is the code I'm bringing in from the book. This is step number 8, page 298. So I'm adding this, and then I'm also at the very bottom here adding this. And I know that it's not formatted and indented exactly correct yet, but I'm going to do the highlighting again and then come up here and then format selection so it indents. So it should look like this when you're done. All right, so we took a little pause in class to kind of make sure everybody's on the same page here. And I am moving on to step number 9. And it says add a calculator function inside the IFE, which will be the constructor function, right? And they're saying try this on your own, right? And I'm sure you guys all just went to step 10 like it says if you're not sure how to do it, and that's absolutely fine because it is kind of a little challenging. But what we're doing here is we're going to add inside this bottom part. So inside the NS calculator section, we're adding a constructor. So how do you add a constructor? Well, you declare a function and then you call it the same as, well, we're not working with a class, mind you, right? Because that's what we're simulating is a constructor function. But you just name it the same as the thing that you're inside of, right? So the namespace is called calculator. You can think of that kind of like a class. And so the constructor function is a function with the same name. Now, because we did that, then all of a sudden we are prototyping everything. So what happens, and I'm just going to paste one in, and then I'm going to do it as a block. But each one of these things here, instead of being functions that are named, they become anonymous functions. Remember, because we're switching to a prototype approach here, that's the why. And what we do in that situation is we'll preface it with this. And then we'll do that for each one. But basically keep it the same. Now the easy way to accomplish that for me is just to copy paste all of it and replace it all. I just think it's more efficient rather than changing each one at a time. And the code I have copied takes me up to this point. So it should look kind of like that. Now at the very bottom here, below this last method, the clear method, we also need to put in a return statement where we're actually going to pass the whole object back, or pseudo object really, like this. And one of the questions we were having, are these parentheses correct? They are correct. So a good point in time to save your work. So that namespace with the calculator and the function that we just added, the constructor, should look something like this when you're done. All right, I'm on step 11 now, page 300. And in step 11 it says, create a calculator variable and assign a new calculator object in the initialize function. So the initialize function is up here at the top, and then the question is, where should I add that? Thoughts? Should I put that at the top? We can always move it if it's wrong. Nothing to freak out about. So calculator, and then notice how we're leveraging the new keyword now because we have a namespace and a constructor function, and how the IntelliSense is picking it all up on top of it all to instantiate a new instance of the calculator. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to adjust this loop that we have here. So this is step number 12. And what we're going to do is we're going to change part of the loop so the event listeners, instead of document get element by ID, we're going to switch to guess what kind of approach. jQuery with a selector that becomes actually more flexible. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the event handler inside of that loop. So watch real carefully here. I'm copying the code from the book. I'm going to replace this entire line, paste it in. You got that? If you're wondering where the heck I'm at, let's pull the book over. I don't want it full screen, but this is where I'm at. So I grabbed that line and I dropped it in. Do you guys notice what I have right below that? Because students always skip this one, right? It says, to make this code work in this step, change the IDs on the number buttons. All right, and let's stop and explain why, because I think that's important to understand. The code that we just added allowed us now to use a different format for selector. So we're selecting a button, so whatever's a button, and then the ID, and then this has a special meaning. The special meaning is, I don't know what that means. Right now, the special meaning is begins with, if I recall correctly. However, if we go to our calculator tests file or our default file, do you notice that all the buttons are named how? BTN and then the number, right? This code here is set up for BTN number. Why did they change it? My guess is they had a different author for the first part of the book. That would be my guess. All right. So what this is saying is this will dynamically go through, provided that all the IDs start with BTN number, but we could also just strike that. So you see, so the two approaches to fix this is get rid of that, what I just got rid of, that's actually the simpler approach. Or what most of you students will probably be apt to do is this on all of these. You see that? All right, so since you guys are probably going to take that approach, let's just take that approach. And then on both pages, oh, but that's not a number, is it? We only want the numbered keys. So do you understand why we're adding number now? Right? Because otherwise it would affect the plus button, the minus button, the clear button. Right. See, there's actually a reason for it. It's not just happenstance. No, not with that code. Because, okay, Susie, what would happen is it would correctly look for, boy, yeah, so, yeah. Now, do I need to add button number to everything? You know what? Let's find out. Because my inclination is not to put it on this one. Why? And can I ask you guys, what's the why behind that? I think the why is because we haven't gotten to the other part yet. Because if you look down at, if you're smart like me and you look down at step 16, which I'm seeing on my second screen, I see that I have separate ones for plus, minus, clear, and clear. Got it? So yeah, what we are doing is actually necessary in order for the application to work correctly. So we have to do that both on the default page. So any of the numbered buttons have to have that number word in between, and it looks like we've got them all. And then on the calculator test page, we should do the same thing. So any of the numbered ones, we need to insert that. And that basically is for separation of the two different types of buttons. All right, so let's call step number 12 complete. And actually 13 complete and 14 complete, because that's basically what it tells you to do on those steps. All right. Then we want to go back to the calculator library. Oh, you guys are pointing out a mistake? You should have let me make the mistake. But you guys are such good students. Thank you for pointing it out. Because then it's more fun to watch your teacher fail. at least in the short term. Right. All right, so we fixed that one. And then they want us to go back to the JavaScript file and go back to the initialize function. And then it says delete the elements that set the text input and result. Once again, we're going to convert those to jQuery. And so part of the exercise here is just learning about how easy it is to convert things to jQuery. I am on step 15, page 300. And then we are going to replace the next few document get element by IDs, all of these. Oops, not with number, rather. We're going to replace all of those with a converted jQuery statement. Now, the other thing that is important here, and I'm realizing that I messed up, is because we're using jQuery, and this is kind of fascinating. You guys notice what I'm doing right now? I'm eliminating the need for a loop. So I don't need to have a loop that's running all the time, reading through all the buttons. Because it has a built-in event handler in the jQuery libraries, that event handler is always running loops. So it just runs. Look at that simplified code, folks. Tell me that isn't easier to understand. It is easier to understand. Because these event handlers don't require a loop to operate. Actually, they didn't before either. Why was the loop there? To make sure we went through each button. But really, if you think about how a loop operates, or how an event handler operates, excuse me, is it's something that's sitting in the background all the time waiting for something to happen. How is that working? It's a loop, right? Your operating system has all sorts of little loops that are running, waiting for your mouse to move across the screen and click. And then it figures out, where did you click? Okay, well, let's do that. Interesting. That was step number 16. Yeah, the caret indicates that any button that's got an ID that begins with the string button number, so it covers all of them. The brackets, that's indicating that we're doing a attribute selector. That's a CSS3 higher end selector. So the question was basically what's up with the brackets, right? The brackets indicate, okay, well this is our regular tag, so we're looking for a tag of button, but then we're looking for an attribute of ID that begins with button number. Now, could I write 10 separate ones that were like button ID equals button number 0, button number 1? I could do that. That would work too. But that's 10 lines of code. This is 1 line of code. Covers all the scenarios. Yeah, those are just, well, those are IDs because they're a pound sign. The same selector that you would use in your CSS to select a particular object on the screen is the same thing you use here. Those are not attributes. Those are IDs. Okay, let me explain the difference, right? In this case, we're looking for, okay, a particular, okay, a pound sign implies that it's an ID to begin with, right? So that's kind of, interpreted in the background. But in this other case, we're looking for one that's conditional. So for example, I mean, we're picking ID as the attribute because yes, it is an attribute, but I could choose any other attribute I wanted and make it trigger. Okay, those are nuances. As long as you figure out how we're getting there. All right, number 17, bottom of page 300. We're going to convert the number click method to use Jquery. So that is down here. So here's number click. And we've already done our prototyping and everything. And what we're going to do is we're going to change this whole statement here to use Jquery. Once again, you're going to see that we're going to cut down on some text. Well, at least, some text. I mean, I think it's easier to read. So let's go ahead and just grab this first line all the way up through the question mark. And I'm doing that basically because it's split over 2 pages. All right, so that's the first part. And this is the second part. Syntactically, really not that far off. And I would probably, really, for all intents and purposes, when you have these newfangled if-else statements with the question mark and the colon, really that's one long line, but wouldn't fit very nicely. It would be very hard to read. All right, and guess what our job is for the rest of this? We got to do that with all of those. All right, so get busy. I'll do mine, see if you can do yours faster. That was step 18. This is step 19. Does that cover all of them? I guess some of these we don't need to change, right? Because if we're just changing the values, those just go to 0, so they don't need to be adjusted. So now I'm on step number 20, bottom of 301. And this one says convert the clear entry method. So let me just double check that one. Oh yeah, that does need to be converted. Okay, let's just change that. Same approach. And then the same for the regular clear. And folks, I will tell you that most modern coders that work in these environments will prefer the jQuery approach to doing the selectors just because it's just faster, I think, and easier to understand. So I'm hoping that you guys feel the same thing about it. You might not, and don't feel bad if you don't, but there it is. All right. I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see all the changes that were made in this section. So it should look like that. The book shows that bridged over page 301 and 302. Now from there, we are going to jump to the top of the default file, HTML file. So let's go there. And then we're going to add a call to jQuery between the CSS and the calculator library.js. Why do we want to put the jQuery library here and not after the calculator library.js? Well, no, it's not just the styles. Yes, we do want the styles to come into play first, but also the calculator library uses jQuery. So if I don't list jQuery first, it's not going to find it, right? That's the why. So I just dragged and dropped the link in. You're going to want to do the same thing to the calculator file. And so what I'm doing here, and I'm kind of like racing ahead on my document, but I'm right here right now. I'm on bottom of page 302, so I added the link. Yes, mine is different than what's in the book because I'm using a different version. And then they show you what that whole file should look like, and I'm just assuming, yes, that's what it looks like. But notice that they're also adding something at the bottom, which we do not have yet, and that's easy to miss, and thank you that they bolded it. But at the very bottom of this default page, below all the code and just before the closing body tag, we are going to actually replace the pre-existing script. So we're going to get rid of the one that's there, and instead of doing basically a window load event where we're using the JavaScript libraries to do it, we're switching over to jQuery and we're letting the document ready function do the same thing. Is the document loaded up and ready? Let's go. But notice that what this does is it doesn't trigger any of the JavaScript until the page is loaded up first. The page loads, the CSS loads, it's on the page. Now we can do something with it. If we did it conversely, would it work? Actually, it probably still would, but this is considered a safe approach. So very often when you see jQuery used or certain types of JavaScript libraries, the preference is load the interface first, get it up on the screen, get your styles in place, then execute the script. Doesn't make sense to have like a script running that doesn't have an object attached to it, especially if there's event handlers. So that's the why for that. Okay, so that was step number 22. Then we're moving over to the calculator test HTML file. This is step number 23. Once again, we're going to scroll up to the top and we're going to add the jQuery library. It's going to go right. Let's see. Well, oh wow, we probably want to switch these around. So I'm noticing that the book, and I should show you once again, notice the order the book has them in. Right, they do CSS, QUnit, jQuery, calculator library, and then tests. My intuition and experience tells me we want to match that. So if your order is different, switch it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the QUnit link, I'm going to put it so that it's second, and then I'm going to put my jQuery libraries here, and I am going to get rid of the extra spaces. Not that it's really necessary, but you know. Well, you know, QUnit doesn't require the jQuery. It's smart to have the CSS loaded first because sometimes jQuery will affect it. In this case, I don't think we really are. So, you know, maybe the order isn't that relevant, but absolutely the jQuery library has to come before the calculator one. Otherwise, that will fail.
Yeah, for some reason like that, with jQuery, let's get ideas like
Yeah. Yeah, and there won't be because that's written in straight JavaScript. All right, and then subsequently, if you scroll down past page 304 and then on to 305 at the top, they show you what your page should look like. So make sure it looks something like this. Remember, we added all these numbers here. All right, now we're going to switch over to the test.js file, folks, and take a look at that. So I've got that open. And it says in this file we want to add another reference So let's do that way at the top, once again, first line. And I am going to copy paste it in, although I could type it, I guess. Just seems like so much work. Right. Whining about a copy paste. And then the next thing that they're doing is they're also changing the stuff inside this module here. And if you follow what I'm doing, they're just basically removing this initialize function and not removing it, using the renamed version of it, which is calculator namespace. And no flags, no underlines, so I think we're okay. So this is the test.js file, step number 25, page 305. All right, now that we're inside the test.js file, I'm on step number 26, bottom of page 305. It says modify the initialize test. And it says you don't need to set the text input and text result because this initialize method calls a clear method to set these text boxes. So what can I do? I can just strike those, right? And they show you what the finished version should look like in step number 27. So try to match that up. And I'm doing just a little side-by-side screen comparison. And then I'm also noticing that these equal statements, and maybe you guys are picking up on this too, need to be converted over to jQuery as well. So there's the first part. The second part. This next one I can get all in one fell swoop, which is replacing this part. Once again, converting everything to jQuery syntax, really just using different selectors. Step number 28. Now we're going to modify this method here. And if you're like many of my students, they just copy and paste the whole code in. I guess you can do that. I'm looking for maybe a little more efficiency than that. And I'm seeing that the places where there's changes are basically inside the for loop. So instead of copy and pasting all the code, I'm just going to grab all the stuff inside the for loop and use that. That would be all of this stuff replaced with that. Once again, only difference, folks, is changing it to jQuery syntax. You know, you guys notice I got 5 files that are open that are unsaved with all the changes I just did. Great time to hit save all, right? All we need is like loss of power, EMP attack or something like that to lose our work. Next, we're moving on to the add test function. Once again, changing things to jQuery syntax. And that's basically all of it. I'm not going to grab all the code to cut and paste in, but I'm grabbing the parts that I know are different, which is basically from here through here, pasting it in. Moving on to the subtract test, same deal. And I'm looking at this so carefully so I don't cut and paste incorrectly. Just make sure whatever you're copy pasting that you're consistent with it. And then I have one more line there to grab. Now, one question they'll get from people is like, man, if I had to code this from scratch, I would never be able to do it. You guys are feeling that way, right? Right. Okay. Yeah, and that's actually pretty normal. The point here isn't the coding from scratch. The point is seeing the connection, how we're taking stuff that we've already done, that we maybe kind of understood, hopefully, and we're converting it to a different syntax. That's all we're doing. Because if you watch the change I just made, right, before we set up variables that would be equivalent to this selector, and now we're just replacing it with the jQuery, basically eliminating that need. But really it's saying the same thing. It's not really saying anything different. That was step number 30. Now we're on page 307, step 31. We're doing the clear entry test. And if I'm not mistaken, and you guys will probably cheer for this, this is the last chapter where we're doing Q unit testing. Goodbye and good riddance, right? Unless you become a professional software tester, and there are jobs like that, then you might see a whole lot more of this in your life. Step number 32. We're fixing the clear test. I'm changing all of these lines here. Let's do a save all again just to be on the safe side. When you're done with all those steps, we're basically done now, folks, believe it or not. We actually even did it before the class ended, which amazes me, honestly. Go ahead and right-click the default page and set it as start page. That's what the book says. That's step number 33. And then go ahead and start the application. All right, so the application is up and running. Now, proof is in the pudding, right? Does the calculator still work? All right, let's try to do some math. Good. Is it working correctly? Can I clear my entry? Yep. Can I clear everything? Now one thing so this is my design thing. I click the button and the thing like moves. You see how it moves like that? Every time I press the button? Don't like it. Why does that happen? Yeah, there is something in the CSS you can do to fix that. And I think it's actually a border thing because I think when I'm clicking this, it's adding a border around it. So I might be able to fix that actually by just changing some of the CSS. The calculator is working. I thought we had a little thing in here. That was preventing that from happening, but perhaps not. So if you want to, oh, I see it. See it? Here's something that's broken. Although that wouldn't cause that problem, but you know, it's always worth checking, right? So what state is this when I'm clicked and holding it? Active. Yeah. So where we would look to fix it in the CSS is we would find all the stuff that's related to links. Did we do a section like that? Where we styled our links, or did we not? Button, hover, active, border width, thick. My inclination would be if I just remove that, it would fix it. Should we test that? Run it again. Nope, still doing it. Can I be sure that it actually is still doing it? Notice how I'm refreshing like 20 times. Maybe Control F5. Fixed. Right? Now, I discovered a really interesting trick, actually, this weekend. So, proof that you always learn new things when you're doing this stuff. So I've taught you guys, like, sometimes you can't trust that your browser's refreshing and you don't know, like, you're making changes. So Control F5 is how you do it. I discovered, online of course, that if you're in developer mode, and what developer mode means is if your inspect toolbar is operational, you can then right-click your refresh button. Notice the options? But that's not available if the inspect panel is not open. So you can do a regular refresh, normal reload, a hard reload, which is the Control F5, and apparently Control Shift R. I didn't know that either. And then you also have the option to empty your cache in hard reload if all else fails, which is equivalent to, like, you know, clearing your cache, shutting off your browser, and restarting it. Isn't that cool? So if I get rid of that inspect panel and right click, I don't have that option. But if I have the inspect panel running, you can right click. And the cool thing is I know that it works in Firefox and Safari also, because I tried it in those two. Right click on the refresh button, and then instead of just being a regular refresh button, it gives you the other options. I think that's pretty cool. All right, folks. I'm going to end the video here, and then we can answer questions and whatnot. So I will see you video watchers next week.